Good afternoon and welcome back from the breakout sessions. I hope you had good discussions in those. I'm Naomi Clayton, Acting Director for Policy and Research at Learning and Work Institute. We're now back to the final part of the day where we'll be hearing a keynote from Andrew Brownlee, the Chief Exec of SOLAS, and we'll be onto the final panel session. So if I can just remind you to use the hashtag for the conference when you're tweeting, and also remind you to submit any questions that you've got into the Slido Q&A as Andrew will be joining the panel later. I know that there's been really good engagement, some really good questions so far. So let's continue that in this last session. So I'm going to hand over straight to Andrew Brownlee. As I said, he is Chief Executive at SOLAS, the state agency responsible for further education and training and apprenticeships in Ireland. And he's going to be giving us a presentation now before joining the panel. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Naomi, and afternoon to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here at your conference. Really interesting day, and yeah, hopefully I can kind of bring some learning from some of our experiences and how we address, you know, needs around kind of adult basic skills, because I think we have some very recent and very pertinent experience of kind of trying to develop a long time strategy in this space. So if you just bear with me for 1 second, I should be able to share just a few slides here. I think we're okay with that. Naomi, is that up for everyone okay there? Yeah.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks very much. Yeah. So look, we're actually at a really exciting point, I think. In the last few months, we've published a 10-year strategy to address literacy, numeracy, digital inclusion in Ireland. And I think it gave us a real opportunity to kind of rethink how we work in this space, you know, and what we really need to do and how we really need to join things up in order to make a difference. I mean, I suppose the first question to ask is, oh, sorry, this one. Yeah, sorry. The first question to ask really is, you know, why was there a need for it? And I think everyone at this conference will understand the need, but in Ireland there were quite kind of stark statistics, you know, and despite, you know, a generally well-educated population and, you know, a real tech-driven economy, I think it's fair to say now, you know, the last PIAC study still found that almost 1 in 5 adults struggled with reading and understanding everyday text. About 1 in 4 of them had difficulty using maths in everyday life. And then about 1 in 2, 47% of adults lack basic digital skills. And look, that was a bit of a shock when you heard that for the first time, because you think, well, look, everyone has a smartphone now, you know, so surely everyone has those basic digital skills. But, you know, it's just not about that. It's been able to do things, particularly in the pandemic, you know, like online banking, you know, apply for a job, draw down your social welfare, all of those life skills that are so important, and so many people still don't have them. I suppose the other worrying thing, you know, we kind of had got to a point where, you know, there'd been very significant progress in terms of addressing early school leaving rates in Ireland over the last couple of decades. Literacy levels internationally at school age were pretty impressive. And that's why when you see that kind of chart on the bottom right there, you'll see it's towards the right-hand side, towards the economies and the societies that you would traditionally think are quite advanced in terms of their education system. But recent OECD analysis showed that, you know, while school-age literacy was very, very good, kind of progression as you moved into adulthood, and the proportion of people that were developing their literacy skills from that quite admittedly high base actually wasn't great at all. And you know, in comparison to other states and other countries, you know, we weren't doing great in terms of the improving adult literacy levels, which perhaps are borne out in those kind of headline figures. So that was the challenge, you know, because, you know, adult literacy is certainly a big part of what we do, working in partnership with our providers, the education and training boards. I think we live in a society where community education is really, really valued, as is further education. You know, we have great NGOs working in this space, including the National Adult Literacy Association. But yeah, the problem kind of really prevails. And I think, you know, part of the answer lies in that, you know, we all know that unmet literacy needs aren't just about having, you know, the education available, but it's about all of the health, all of the family, the community supports you need. It's about dealing with, you know, justice issues, integration issues, a whole stream of related issues and supports that, unless you have in place and you let to make a real difference in terms of addressing those unmet literacy needs. So I think, you know, I suppose I was asked to come here and reflect on the learning from going through that exercise of developing a 10-year strategy to address adult basic skills, literacy, numeracy, and so forth. And I think, you know, the biggest lesson is that when you do this and when you try to move to that more joined up approach, you really need to go big on consultation, you need to go big on representation, you need to go big on engagement. And I would say, you know, we were given the mandate. Now, we're the Further Education and Training Agency, but the government and our minister gave us the mandate to develop this as a cross-government and a cross-society strategy to address unmet literacy needs. And the key to that was a really all-inclusive process. And I have to say, I can't thank my colleague, Roisin Doherty, and our team enough for the incredible and intensive effort they put into the consultation process and the research process. And essentially, you know, bringing people in and bringing them all along for a real clear vision of where we needed to go in terms of unmet literacy needs. So just to touch on the scale of that, you know, during the research process, we would have reviewed 400 different kind of strategy, policy, research documents. We would have looked internationally at 10 international systems. And I know that Roisin would have talked to Stephen and colleagues in the Learning and Work Institute to gather that international evidence. 139 different organisations contributed to the start. We had a call for submissions, so they contributed in there. We would have met an awful lot of them as well. 396 individuals took the time to come in and write about their ideas and suggestions for the way in which we could make improvements. We did a survey of kind of attitudes of 1,100 people. We consulted with 400 users of support services, education and learning. And we also had 66 bilateral meetings with different organisations as well. So a real comprehensive, intensive research process. I think absolutely key was the buy-in of our minister, the Minister for Further and Higher Education. And he actually made the commitment of chairing an interdepartmental committee, a cross-government committee, where we had 11 government departments and 8 key agencies feeding into the strategy and essentially being accountable to our minister. We also had a wider and really productive technical advisory committee where we had 33 different organisations, and that brought in the non-governmental kind of perspectives around the table as well. And that was incredibly important in terms of, you know, understanding the real needs on the ground that had to be addressed. So, I mean, that's the core learning point, I think, from what we did was just, you know, make sure that you involve everyone that needs to be involved and that they stay engaged and that they can see their bit of the jigsaw and what emerges. You know, as we know, literacy is, you know, has so many aspects that impact on our lives. And you know, one of the initial problems, I'm sure there'll be people who can sympathise with this, was actually getting the definition right. You know, what is literacy? You know, what isn't it? You know, how do we define it? I mean, the remit for our strategy was literacy, numeracy, and digital literacy. If we were going to write that, every 3 lines in a strategy immediately becomes unreadable. So one of the things that the strategy really helped do, and that really intensive consultation process helped with, was to really develop an understanding of all of the different aspects that unmet literacy needs are interrelated with, you know, from family life, health, living safely, you know, employability, keeping a job when you get it, you know, doing shopping, accessing services, financial services, you know, being an active citizen in your community, developing new skills. You know, all of those are completely interconnected with those kind of adult basic skills. And one of the things we did at the start of the strategy is saying, well, look, we're just going to use the very broadest definition of literacy here. And we're going to say that, you know, every time we talk about literacy, what we mean is that, you know, the listening, the speaking, the reading, the writing, the numeracy, and using everyday technology to communicate, to access services, and to make informed choices. So that was our starting point. And I think, you know, when you think about how we address these, and, you know, I really like the title of the conference in terms of the higher ambition for adult basic skills. I think you can come at this in a negative way. And as I mentioned, you know, part of the problem, part of the reason we weren't making inroads into those kind of relatively concerning levels of literacy and numeracy was that it was a quite fragmented approach. But I think, you know, we also immediately saw a major opportunity. And I think if you come at this in a positive rather than a negative way, yeah, it's fragmented, but there are so many local services that people with unmet literacy needs engage with on the ground. So if you can actually harness those local services, and if you look on the diagram on the left, you know, there's some of them, you know, things like primary care centres, GPs, pharmacies, you know, ETB learning facilities, 983 community education providers across the country, NTO offices, which are our kind of social welfare job centre offices, you know, digital hubs, citizens information centres, local development companies, libraries, money advice centres, family resource centres. There is a whole stream of local services. If you just bring together, harness them, give them the right tools and the right information, you can really make a difference to that learner journey in terms of identifying people with unmet literacy needs, you know, and families can play a big part in that, you know, making sure there are lots of different avenues into getting the help and support that they need, and that help and support is joined up. And then, in fact, you can generate those positive outcomes that we're looking for. So I suppose that was really the basis for the thinking around the new strategy. And what we aim to do overall is to put in place a range of commitments and actions across 4 core pillars to ensure that people can understand their needs and where to go to meet them, that they can access all of the learning and support that they need, that the learning and support that's available can actually expand and be enhanced to meet this massive challenge, and that we empower people and communities to make a real difference to their lives. So on the right hand side, you see the overall strategic framework, and I would just recommend, you know, if this has sparked an interest today, it's well worth just going on to solas.ie or Adult Literacy for Life, which I'll talk about in the end, and just have a look through this, because all the details there, and I only have 15 minutes, so I don't want to dwell on that. But I suppose, you know, that 4th theme, understand, access, expand, and empower, underpinned by a partnership approach, really is at the centre of all of this. So when we talk about improving understanding, first of all, it's about a big national campaign which is already underway, just to make people aware that, you know, there's a new approach coming, that there are ways to, you know, there are support available. There are ways to kind of tell if your family and friends are experiencing unmet needs, and where to go to kind of signpost them to get help. One of the big things, and you know, this is always a problem, so many different organisations, so many different resources. so people get confused as to, where do I go to get help? What if I have, health needs, childcare needs, transport needs, alongside learning needs. So one of the things that we are doing is putting in place a one-stop shop, adult literacy for life, where people can go to get all of the resources in one place, and that's developing over time. I think proactive local services is a really key part of this as well. And, making sure that, if you go into the social welfare office, or if you go into a GP practice, a doctor's practice, then they will be able to see the signs of you maybe having unmet literacy needs. They'll know how to deal with that, and they'll be able to talk to you and signpost you into the appropriate services. So that kind of training and awareness raising, big part of it as well. And also a common assessment approach, making sure that if people present with unmet needs, there's a kind of common and consistent approach to identifying what those needs are and what supports that they require in return. In terms of access, it's obviously about making sure that everything, particularly in relation to essential government services, is in plain and accessible content, that the accessible technology is there and available to help people with particular kind of learning needs. That we don't just talk about institutional environments, because one of the things, I'm sure it's the case in the UK as well, is that many people in work and many people in higher education also have literacy and numeracy support needs, and making sure that they're available in a kind of non-intrusive, non-threatening way in those environments, I think is really important as well. And one of the big developments in recent years has been around the kind of universal design for learning approach, and rolling that across all further education activity as well. It's also about expanding provision as well, making sure that there's a focus on numeracy and not just literacy, driving digital competency, supporting skilled practitioners. That's a really important point, I think, in all of this, making sure that there's consistent entry requirements to becoming a practitioner in delivering literacy and numeracy education, then supporting people in professional development, along the way once they come into the profession, and making sure that the funding is there and the local interventions are there to innovate and enhance provision. And finally, I suppose it's about empowering people and communities, making sure there's person-centred pathways, linking to guidance, linking to all of the support services they need, making sure that the particular needs of vulnerable groups are met through specific interventions that take account of their unique needs, making sure we support things at community level with a new approach based on local literacy action plans, and linking to health and well-being, so that people get the healthcare support, can develop their health literacy, and also can walk into a local kind of healthcare facility and be given the advice and support that they need. Am I coming to the end, Naomi? Is that why you're back on screen? My time is nearly up. I'll just be one more minute if that's okay with you. Yeah. I suppose, and I suppose the final piece of the jigsaw, and going back to what I mentioned at the start, I think the most critical part of our experience was, getting the buy-in, the cross-government buy-in and the cross-society buy-in. And the worst thing that can happen is you get all that buy-in, you get the momentum, you produce a report like this and it sits on the shelf and nothing else happens. So one of the things we've been really committed to doing is putting in place implementation structures that will continue to embed that approach. So that's a cross-government implementation group chaired by the Minister, a national programme office where what we want to do is bring together health representatives, local government representatives, representatives from the NGO sector, representatives from the education sector, and create that cross-government programme office, which can kind of enact real change outside of the system that we're directly responsible for, and work has going on that. And one of the big developments, I think, was around, the appointment of regional literacy coordinators. That was an announcement in the recent Irish budget. Essentially, they're going to be the coordinators on the ground, come up with the regional action plans, which can then deliver on the overall strategy. And that will be their responsibility. Their responsibility will be to work across government, across society, and across communities at regional level. So that's the kind of whistle-stop tour of the strategy, the learning, the challenges, and what we're trying to do now. I suppose just to point out that we were very conscious we didn't want the strategy to be launched and then nothing to happen. So we've done a few things to kind of make sure we hit the ground running. First of all, there's now that one-stop shop in development, but nonetheless, adult literacy for life.ie, where we're putting the strategy and all the resources in place, and that will be built up over time. There's been a series of new resources around best practice in literacy and numeracy, good practice. And as I said, there's the new dedicated regional literacy coordinators. So look, I think really interesting times, really exciting terms. Hopefully I gave you a flavour for what we're doing, and that's slightly more than 15 minutes, so apologies for that, Naomi. But looking forward to the panel discussion and indeed to any questions either today or after today on the work that we're doing. So thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. And appreciate there was a lot to get through there, and really interesting to hear about all the work that's gone into creating that 10-year strategy and that kind of really kind of joined up approach, and the fact that you're thinking about all of the various kind of access and engagement points is clearly really important, particularly given that's one of the, I think, biggest challenges in this area is how do you engage people who could benefit from support in this area. So brilliant. We're going to move on to the panel discussion now, and we're joined by a fantastic lineup of panelists, and I'll introduce them as I invite them to make their opening statements. We're going to be focusing on the importance of basic skills and how we drive a focus on basic skills at various levels, and clearly there's lots to learn from the experience in Ireland as well. And clearly the figures are really, the figures that you were presenting, Andrew, are really striking. The figures in England show that 1 in 5 adults in England have low numeracy and literacy, and 12 million lack basic digital skills. So, very much kind of similar levels of challenge, and our recent report, as I'm sure we've heard earlier today, highlighted that not only are we facing challenge in terms of the kind of lack of basic skills, but adult participation in adult learning has fallen by over 60% over the past decade, whilst the adult education budget has more than halved. So challenging context. I'm going to hand over to Sally Dicketts, first of all, who's held senior posts in both secondary schools and further education. And in 2013, Sally became the first chief executive of Activate Learning, which comprised is comprised of 7 FE colleges across Oxfordshire, Berkshire and Surrey, as well as 7 schools and a group of training providers. Sally, can I hand over to you to get your thoughts, reflecting on the new Skills for Life report and why it's so important that we get the basics right in adult learning, and how we can effectively drive more of a focus on adult basic skills at different levels.
We know that literacy, numeracy, ESOL and digital skills actually enhance your life chances of getting a good job and social mobility. And I find it slightly ironic when we have a government that's desperate for a levelling up agenda, yet this area is not seen as critical. We have not, in fact, improved our literacy. 20 years ago, we had a higher state of literacy than we've got now. And as you've already said, 1 in 5 adults has low literacy and numeracy. So what is it? Why do we need to have our adults and young people literate? Well, we know that if you have any learning below level 2, it actually has a 7% increase in your chances of getting decent employment. and actually feeling happier in work because it's something you do. Economically, improving basic skills gets a social return. So £17 on entry level and £22 for every pound spent investing in level 1. But what is most important is the emotional impact. If you are an adult and you're illiterate, you have no numeracy and you cannot use IT, you tend to feel shame, you lack self-esteem, and therefore you're not confident and you are less likely to go into learning. So you need to actually change that. Economically, it's really positive. And what I find really interesting is in the report, it says 18% of adults between 19 and 64 are not qualified at a level 2. I would argue that that's a higher number. And this government is at the moment investing, which is wonderful, in level 3, but we do not have sufficient people with level 2 qualifications to make use of level 3. And the reason why I say that is if you look at the adults, both inside work and what's happened, I'll give an example. I'm a level 2 student. I got my qualification in 2000. Now, 21 years later, I'm 38. I've worked with an employer where I have not been enabled to do any learning. I got a qualification, I'm going to say, in plumbing. I don't particularly like reading. I never really do numeracy, and I don't do much in digital. Actually, my qualifications will have gone backwards. Learning is about muscle memory. I will have lost my qualifications and I'm now no longer at level 2. So if 60% of adults with poor skills are in work with employers that are not investing in them, I think the situation is getting worse. So how can we drive a focus and have a different level of policy and achieve some of the things that Andrew was saying that's happening in Ireland? Well, first of all, there's a very clear economic proposition. And I think whether we're dealing nationally or with combined authorities, we need to demonstrate that if they put money into below level 3, then we'll get a much better economic return. We know that we have a need for a highly skilled workforce. The government's desperately wanting to raise level 3, 4 and 5, but it must start at entry level, level 1 and level 2, if it really wants to change the economy we're working in and have the levelling up agenda. It actually makes a savings across departments, and that's the other thing I find frustrating, is that government works in silos. We know, and I've been involved in prison education, the level of skills in most of our prisoners are pretty low. So if you increase the level of skill, not only do you improve the economy, but you save within your prisons. As Andrew's alluded to, health is improved. But more importantly, I was at an event a fortnight ago with a group of schools looking at schools' performance and why hasn't it improved as much as they'd hoped. And I would say that one of the reasons is that the parents of our school children are not receiving the training and development they need. They're unskilled adults. And if you have unskilled adults, one of the impacts is the impact on their children. And therefore, for me, the drive and focus on levels of policy making are economic, social, reduces spend on NHS, reduces spend in prisons, and helps raise performance in schools. I think that's my 5 minutes up.
Brilliant, thank you, Sally. And a really, really important reminder of not just the economic and social benefits, but the fiscal benefits of addressing some of these issues. Just like to remind people to keep putting your questions in Slido for the panel. Before I hand over to Simon Parkinson, who's CEO and General Secretary of the WEA, the leading adult education charity. And Simon, I think you're going to talk a bit about your perspective, bringing in some insights from the WA impact report, and talking a bit about what's happened over the course of the pandemic too, and some of the impacts there.
Yeah, thanks, Naomi. Good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be with you. I'm going to race through 3 or 4 slides because we have to keep to time so that Sue gets her full 5 minutes as well. So you've seen some of these numbers on the left-hand side. They're well known. The need is there. They are scary numbers. They are big numbers, and so there is an absolute need there. And the WEA, we recognise that, and we think that we're having an impact on it, not just in terms of skills for employability. And you'll see some of the numbers at the top, you could maybe criticise us for not doing well enough, 21%, 36%. But actually there is an underlying dynamic here about the types of individuals that the WEA supports, about how far away from work, some of these individuals are. And as we've just heard Sally say, there is a much wider, therefore, context around keeping people healthy and their minds active, reducing isolation, giving people the confidence that they can return to learning, which may or may not increase their employment opportunities. It's far wider, and the need for the development of skills is far greater than just employability. So you've seen the stats, but what makes it really come to life for us are the learner stories. So these are 4 stories from our impact report, from the WEA impact report. You can find that on our website at wea.org.uk. These are actually 4 employability stories. And actually, again, as Sally was suggesting, there isn't a level 3 qualification in sight for any of these stories. These are entry-level students. These are students that have maybe studied in Grace's example up to level 2. And that's what she needed to go on and do the job that she wanted to do, which was be a school support worker. So Grace is on the cover of our impact report, rightly so. Again, if you want to read that, if you want to look at it, please do from the website. But as we were saying, it goes far beyond employability. And if you think here that, what we're talking about is giving people skills that actually are beneficial to them and their community. So this is skills for volunteering. This is skills for really being involved in your community. And actually it's skills for parenting as well. As we've just heard, 70% of our learners who are parents tell us it's encouraged their children to learn more, and 60% nearly say that they feel more confident in helping children with their homework. So again, a wide range of needs really, and a wide range of reasons why community-based adult learning of all levels, not just level 3, is an absolute necessity if we want to level up. So I want to finish with just some thoughts about the pandemic and thoughts about policy. So we've heard that actually there's been a steady decline, quite a big decline over the last 10 years, but there has been some increased interest and participation in adult learning through the pandemic. People refer to it as the Joe Wicks effect. We know there are inequalities in that those that perhaps need adult learning the most are the least likely to access it, but there are some positives there. And I think there's no doubt this is the case at the WEA, I'm sure, for many providers, that those lockdowns absolutely accelerated our use of digital learning technologies. Yes, it also exposed the issues of digital poverty and the digital skills agenda that we're talking about, but it is here to stay. We see a desire to return to venue-based learning, but we also see a desire to stay online. And we also know that the community learning venues that we use, some of them have disappeared through the pandemic or are still not ready to open. So I think that blended learning approach is here to stay. I think the pandemic has been a catalyst for that. As you've heard me say, I think the political focus on adult skills is at level 3. I think that's great. I think hearing a chancellor in a budget speech talk about lifelong learning is fantastic. But actually, at the same time, I heard MP after MP misunderstanding and misrepresenting community learning as somehow just aimed at retired professionals doing Japanese. That's the quote that I've heard. You know, it's not that. It's not been that for many, many years. It's key to developing these essential skills that we're talking about. The multiplier program, and I know that Sue may talk about this, is a massively good start. I would argue, do we need the same for literacy? Do we need to look at the ESOL eligibility rules? Do we need to see this in the way that Andrew was suggesting in the round, that these are a suite of essential skills? And I keep saying essential skills because I think language is really important in this if we're going to engage those that need the most support. If what we're saying to adults is you're less proficient than a 9-year-old at math, and our solution is to send you to a boot camp, I'm not sure that's going to engage the people that we work with in the WEA. This has to be in their community. It has to be in the context of their everyday lives. You know, and it has to be positive. We have to use that positive language rather than negative or punitive language. So my ask today, and I'll finish with this, is maybe we stop calling it basic skills and maybe we move to an essential skills, because this is, you know, really, really important if to enable individuals and communities to truly level up. So thanks, Naomi. I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. Really important point to end on. Susan, if I can hand over to you, straight to you, because I'm conscious of time. Invite Sue Pember, who's Policy Director of HOLEX, the professional body for adult education services, centres and institutions. Sue, you started your career as a teacher, and you've worked across colleges, local authorities and government, so have really interesting, important perspective here. If I can ask for your take on some of the policy, what types of policy developments would support providers to focus on adult basic skills, and where the kind of key opportunities are in this space.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a joy to be here. I think there's some people out there that might have attended more of these annual literacy and numeracy conferences, but I think I'd be at the top of the list for good attendance. I'll get Alex to give me a gold star at some point. So thank you for inviting me again. And you know, I'm really positive at this moment in time. If you spoke to me 18 months ago, I was a bit in the doldrums, thinking all the good work that we did during the last sort of 15 years had got sort of been downgraded a bit. However, I do think that the government is listening. I do think our new Secretary of State has got it. I do think the Chancellor understands that if you have poor numeracy skills, then you're not going to do well in life, full stop. And it was pleased that he announced the new multiply initiative. But one of the things I think we need to reflect on is what works, really does, what works. And we know that there are certain ways of doing things that work. And earlier in the year, we produced a new little document called Skills for Life 20 Years On. And I loved listening to Andrew, because lots of the things that you're doing is what we would say works. Yeah. And the main one being endorsement from the top. Yes, as a group of institutions and agencies, we can work together and we can do so much. But without that political endorsement, you know, it's not as easy as it should be. And we need that group of ministers right across government to come together exactly in the way that Andrew described. You know, it's no good education. Education should take the lead, but they can't do it without DWP. They can't do it without health. They can't do it without the new levelling up department. They can't do it without housing. They can't do it without, you know, the Home Office and prison education. That whole lot need to come together. And then we need a whole government approach. I don't know what people on this listening think, but for God's sake, then we must be able to sort out ESOL eligibility, right? It does cross 5 departments, but it isn't like putting a man on the moon or a woman on the moon. We must be able to sort out that eligibility. And that is the things that the grit in the system. We have really good intentions, but if little things like that are not sorted, then we all lose a bit of hope, and we spend our energy on trying to get clarification, not our energy on doing what's right by our learners. And I think that's why we need, you know, government endorsement across government. But at the same time, we also need a bit of mainstreaming, and we won't get big numbers returning to literacy and numeracy classes unless we properly mainstream it through the funding. So all these little initiatives, you know, whether they boot camps, whether they kickstart, whether they the free level 3s, whether they the new multiplier, unless they mainstream, we do not get big numbers. And take for the example for that is traineeships. You know, quite an interesting initiative, works for some client groups, but the numbers are minuscule, 3,000. So if all of them, and that's nationally or England, if all of them were doing add-on literacy and numeracy, that's not where we need to be. You know, again, you know, taking on what Andrew said, this is what they're doing is a fantastic, you know, big all-consuming initiative involving everybody, and that's what we need to do. And then one of the most important features, like learning from the past, is our teachers. The teachers make this. You know, teachers, lecturers, are sport people. They absolutely make or break this, because learning a new skill or advancing your skill as an adult is really difficult. It starts from the moment, not the moment you come across the threshold or literally online, but the moment you meet somebody out there that directs you that way. So whether it's the GP receptionist, or whether it's the person in your gym, or the family learning person in your school, that's where it all starts, and it has to be people-centered. But they just don't do it. They have to be trained, they have to be supported, they have to be acknowledged, and they have to be recognised. And I'm absolutely positive at this moment in time we're not doing enough for the people that matter the most in ensuring effective literacy and numeracy, and that's the teachers. But one thing teachers have said to me recently that I hadn't realised, and Sally, I'm really sorry about this, right? But you really do need to have a word with your colleagues, right? When you look at colleges' prospectuses at this moment, it's not really featuring, right? So when you're not seeing that massive offer, you're not seeing that link. So, you know, it would be lovely that everybody that turned up at a college or one of the adult community education centres, they were subtly assessed for literacy and numeracy, and they had there's an add-on course, a wraparound put to them. And I take Simon's point, it's no good telling them, you know, the whip bit doesn't work. It's got to be the carrot. It's got to be, you will do better on your course if we actually spend time helping you improve your literacy skills. And that is the sort of wraparound we need to do. But the first instance, you know, we need to offer it. What's that advert at the moment? If we build it, they will come. Right? I think we talked about hedgehogs, but, you know, we need to build it for them to come, you know, because it's no good saying, well, we want everybody to progress up to GCSE if the GCSE isn't there for them. So we have an issue that we could sort ourselves on that. And we need to underpin it, and that's why government has got a role with really robust programme management. You know, it's great that we're all allowed to set our own targets and say what we're going to do, but you know, we need to be more robust about our intention now, and we need to upfront. And again, that is something that we can do ourselves. Now, going forward, if we know what's worked, why aren't we doing it? And I think that's what this conference really is about really the future. You know, we need, all of us, me, you know, Sally, Simon, we all need to take responsibility. And when we were doing that document earlier in the year, we asked all the leading bodies to commit to something. And Learning and Work have been fantastic, right? They committed to doing the data, and they've done it. They committed to taking forward the group that we put together, and we're now calling that the Skills for Life Alliance, so that we can do it. You can try and do much of this ourselves. But we still need to do more, and we need to be opportunists now. So the new multiplier scheme, we don't know what it really looks like yet, But we do know it's been announced by the Chancellor. We do know he's wedded to it. We do know he cares about it. So let's make it our own. Let's adopt it. Let's help it, achieve, and let's shape it. And let's bring back, as part of that, use it. They already talked about stepping stones. Let's bring back that sort of stepping stone process that we was working really well and drawing down funding and was really quite accountable and got students to where they need to be. As you see, I'm continuing my enthusiasm. I do know that it works, by the way, because between 2011, and again, for lots of people on this call who stuck with this agenda, between 2001 and 2011, we did manage to get 14 million people improve their skills, which actually, did do for those, did change their lives in many ways. And that's been, evaluated properly. But as Simon said, the numbers have now plummeted. And we've got to go back to that level of activity. Not 3,000 euros there. We need 1 million each year properly going through something that looks like a proper program that leads to something that will in time go up the ladder to GCSE level or level 2 functional skills. So thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I will be back next year with a bit of luck.
Brilliant, thank you, Sue, and I'm glad that you're feeling more positive than you have done, and clearly I think there's quite a lot of consensus across the panel about the need for that political endorsement, a need for that kind of whole government approach and the kind of individualized, tailored approach to support for individuals too, and the focus on what works, and kind of focusing on change around what we know works. I'd like to come. We're very tight on time now, but Andrew, if I can come back to you for your kind of quick reflections on what you've heard. Also, would be interested if you could pick up on Simon's point about some of the kind of more recent impacts of the pandemic and the opportunities around digital learning technologies to engage and motivate learners.
Yeah, look, thanks, Naomi, and really interesting to hear from the panel, and it just kind of reinforces we're all dealing with the same issues, and while what I think we have now is we have a really good strategy and a sense of what needs to be done. We have a collective, a coalition, I suppose, of the right people around the table in government and outside government, and also at kind of national and regional and community level. But that's, in a way, that's the easy part, even though it was no mean feat to get us to this point. The tricky part is keeping that going and delivering real change and getting to the point where you can walk into a doctor's surgery or a pharmacy or your social welfare office, and the person at the other side of the counter will be able to recognise, well, maybe this person needs a bit of support, perhaps broach the subject in a non-intrusive way, and then signpost them onto the services and the learning that they need. So look, it's a start, and I think it's the right direction. And I think if you can get that ministerial commitment and kind of cross-government, cross-society approach, then it's possible. But there's obviously a lot of work to be done. Yeah, just on the pandemic, I mean, we didn't have the big decline that England would have seen, over the last 6, 7, 8 years prior to the pandemic. Adult education, community education participation was strong, but the pandemic has had a massive impact, particularly in our vulnerable target groups, the type of people for whom wholly online learning just isn't suitable and just isn't appropriate. So look, we've seen, I think, people with disabilities accessing further education, I think down by about 13-14%, similar, the traveller community, older people actually. So we've seen all of these target groups that we've been prioritising and trying to build up for years. We've seen participation levels drop. So a big onus now is hopefully we move and maintain kind of full on-site kind of provision is re-engaging with those learners, because it's a big challenge, and we've lost a lot of people because they haven't had the wraparound support. They haven't been able to go into that environment to get the kind of the learning that they need. So it's a big problem for us, and something that really focuses our attention every day.
Great. Okay, so I think we can run a maximum of 5 minutes over time. So we've got 4 minutes left. So very quick reflections from the panelists, please. If we can just touch on one of the questions that's come through from the audience about kind of creating more of a culture of learning, which I think picks up on some of Andrew's points about engagement points and access as well. But how do we create more of a culture of learning and ensure people are better able to engage with all aspects of society? And very quickly, I'd be really interested in your thoughts on how we engage more employers as part of this too, because we know that 5 million people in work lack basic skills, yet 90% of employers don't recognise a need for basic skills training. So Sally, if I can come to you for your quick thoughts on those.
I'm going to start with employers and then work backwards. I think we must engage employers. Employers are screaming out at the moment because they don't have the right skills level. I think now is the time to engage employers because they want to do things differently. And certainly the employers I've spoken to aren't against doing work like this. Often their employees do not want to be noticed for their level of literacy and numeracy because they don't want to be disadvantaged in work. So I think it goes back to something Sue said. We've got to be very careful how we expose people, but we need to do it in a caring way. But I think government and colleges and the rest of us should start engaging with employers and allowing them. I mean, we used to do in the old days basic skills literally 24/7, and our staff used to go into employer premises and just sit there and help and develop those skills with individuals. So I think there are things like that we can go back and do. Just to reassure Sue, we do assess all our students' numeracy and literacy, and it's been fascinating this year assessing it when so many people have supposedly got GCSE maths and English, and we have a very differing score for their literacy and numeracy. We have started, in order to try and expand it, doing some online basic skills which we've developed in-house to try and help people. And I have been surprised at how many people took it up, because a bit like Andrew has said and Simon said, I assumed people wouldn't want it. They'd want to come in. We do it with coaching, but I think that could be a way, and when I say coaching, we guarantee you've got a coach within 24 hours. So if you go onto the programme and you're struggling, you know that you've got a coach. And I think for those people in work who don't want to expose their lack of literacy and numeracy, for many of them, it's a neat way of starting to learn at their own pace. However, they do have a coach. And if we take Century, which I'm a big advocate for, because it has AI, it begins to diagnose what people can and cannot do. If we could get more of a online Century AI-based work to support people, I think we could use technology positively to help people. But I also think it's not just employers. The other areas, certainly in the days when we did probably more, is going to doctor's surgeries again. We used to actually go in and do work in doctor's surgeries. I think all the things, and actually Andrew outlined them brilliantly. As Sue said, we know what to do. We just need to step back and reframe. And I think colleges particularly, because funding collapsed in this area, almost stepped back and has done what the funder's given us, instead of looking at this as a long-term strategy. If If you don't develop these people, you don't have a long-term strategy. And that was our error of judgment.
Yeah, great. Simon, if I can come to you, and then Sue for very, very quick final comments.
Very quick so that Sue can have the final word. How do you build a culture? Starts by stopping telling young people that education ends at 16, 19 or 25, depending on what you're studying. This is lifelong learning. So the younger we start, the better. So that's how you build the culture. Employers, the old adage, I think, is here. You know, if you train them, they'll become more productive and leave. If you don't train them, they'll stay unproductive and stay. So, you know, you've got to make that balance. You know, you've got to take that balance. So I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you for keeping it brief. Sue, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, Simon's really taking my words out of my mouth. It is all about lifelong learning. You know, our issues with adult literacy start with 3-year-olds. So we really need to get it across to them as early as possible, in the nicest way as possible. They are learning for life. And I think that's really quite important. And with employers, I'd strip it and turn it round. If workers want it, you know, they will put that pressure subtly and internally, and employers will look round to find a provider to support it. We don't do enough about understanding that it's learners who learn. And, you know, that is the most important point. You know, we can say, right, employers this, employers that, but in the end is the workers and the individuals who will put up their time to actually learn something new. So to me, it's to promote it to learners, make learners the focus, and let's have a learner-driven system.
Great. Brilliant. Well, thank you all, and sorry that we've run slightly over and that we haven't got more time for discussion, because I think we could certainly spend more time discussing this, and we will do through further sessions. We're going to send a follow-up email with links to the recordings from today and the various resources that have been mentioned throughout the day. I'd like to remind you that the Festival of Learning Award nominations open tomorrow. I encourage everyone to nominate learners. And yes, thank you again to all of our speakers and contributors today, and thank you to the audience for joining and engaging and asking questions. So we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.